I'm Nick Payton-Walsh in Beirut, and this is CNN.
Hello and good morning to you out there. It's Wednesday, October the 9th. I'm Nina Dos Santos at CNN London.
And I'm Pauline Chu at CNN Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today.
Here are headlines this hour. She could be the next head of the Federal Reserve. We introduce you to Janet Yellen.
U.S. stocks are down and bond yields are up as Wall Street grows even more worried about Washington.
And Walmart decides to go it alone in India, cutting its ties with its local partner Bharti.
We'll go to those stories in a moment, but first, these are the top news stories that we're following at CNN. A high court in China has agreed to hear an appeal by Bo Xilai, a former senior figure in the Communist Party. He was convicted of bribery, embezzlement, and abuse of power last month and sentenced to life in prison. At his trial, Bo maintained his innocence. His downfall and trial was China's biggest political scandal in decades. Police in Bangladesh have recovered 7 bodies after a garment factory burst into flames north of the capital of Dhaka. The cause of this fire is under investigation. The garment industry in Bangladesh has been criticized for failing to ensure workers' safety. The man in charge of the investigation into the bidding process for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups will begin his interviews later on today. Michael Garcia is in London to speak to Lord Treesman, who led England's bid to host the 2018 tournament.
Well, moving back to business news, a White House official has been saying that the U.S. President Barack Obama will likely nominate Janet Yellen this very Wednesday to be the chair of the Federal Reserve. Yellen is currently number 2 at the Fed, so it's an institution that she knows very, very well. But here's the key thing. She'll actually be the first female head of the central bank, if, of course, the Senate does confirm this appointment. Her views are said to be similar to those of the current chairman, Ben Bernanke. So let's have a look at exactly economically what she may have in mind. She's a keen supporter of economic stimulus measures as a way to try and bring down high unemployment and also to stimulate the economy, Pauline.
Well, Nina, let's take a closer look at who Janet Yellen is. Maribel Aber joins us now live from CNN New York with more. Maribel, if Yellen got the job, she would be the most powerful financial figure in the world.
Good morning, Pauline. She would be the most senior financial figure. She would probably be holding actually the most important job here in the United States, right? The most important job because we need to run the country and figure out what's going on with our fiscal policy and the economy. Look, she is no stranger to the Fed, right? She currently serves as a Fed vice chair. And as you said earlier, her views are pretty similar to current Fed chairman Ben Bernanke right now. So hopefully no change there. If she's confirmed by Senate, we don't expect a big change in policy. Let's remind viewers, Bernanke's term ends in January. Before her present position at the Fed, Yellen did serve as president of the San Francisco Fed, and there she did have quite a lot of experience dealing with the housing crisis, maybe more than her colleagues. In terms of her CV, let's take a look at that. Yellen serves as the chair of President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors. She has a bachelor's degree from Brown University and her PhD in economics from Yale. So, of course, I think the big focus right now is what would her stance be on the tapering and Fed stimulus agenda there. And again, for a while it wasn't clear whether she or Larry Summers would get the nomination, and now we're looking closely towards Yellen. And in terms of Wall Street, I think investors may actually look at this favorably if she does continue the same kind of policy as Chairman Ben Bernanke. Then, you know, perhaps we stay on this course. But we'll see. We're watching this very closely. Pauline.
Yeah, in fact, the markets here in Asia are partly on that news that she will officially be nominated, because the belief is that if she becomes the Fed, we'll see more easy money, more cheap money. Of course, that's a relief to the markets. Now, Maribel, she would be the first woman to ever head up the Federal Reserve. So just how historic is that?
I mean, that's unprecedented, Pauline. I mean, again, the central bank in its 100-year history has not had a female in this position before. So, again, as I said before, she'd be holding the most senior position here, I think, in terms of watching our money here in the U.S. But this would be a huge, huge deal. Pauline.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So historic. And Maribel, thank you very much for shedding some light on who Janet Yellen is. And Nina, Janet Yellen would not be the first female central banker. There are a few others. I know you've been looking into this, but only just a handful in the world.
That's right, yeah. I was writing an article about this just a couple of weeks ago about the dearth of women in the world of central banking. You know, Pauline, we don't have a dearth of women on world business today, but there are only 15% of directorships anywhere in the world's central banks that are held by women. But of course, this is a major game changer. Forget the Glass-Steagall Act. This is the glass ceiling that's being broken with Janet Yellen. Now, let's take a closer look at Janet Yellen and exactly how she might steer the US economy, how markets might respond to her, because, of course, that is also a key thing that central bankers need to get on their side. For more, let's go over to Michael Houston, Chief Markets Analyst at the spread betting firm CMC Capital Markets here in London, for a view of how the markets are digesting this. Good morning to you, Michael. So presumably the markets will be cheering. It wasn't exactly unexpected after Larry Summers jumped out of the race, but this could be a good thing for markets, at least in the short term.
I think it's a good thing for continuity, Nina. I always felt that Janet Yellen was the best person for the job, given her service at the Fed and given the fact that she is been amongst the architects of the current Federal Reserve monetary policy and the current fiscal stimulus program. So it really would have made no sense to go with anybody else. And I never really felt Larry Summers was in the running, given the fact that he was such a polarising figure. That being said, markets did pop a little bit higher in Asia overnight as a result of this appointment. But I think more than anything, it doesn't really change the underlying problems that are underpinning or overhanging, I should say, the global economy and obviously the broken politics in the United States.
Well, this is the thing. She's going to have to make herself pretty unpopular when eventually she turns off the taps with this quantitative easing. That could come, say, from March onwards.
That's not going to happen for a while.
It might not happen for a while, but
no.
She's inherited a bit of a poisoned chalice here, hasn't she? Because eventually, at some point during her term, she's going to be the person who'll have to dole out the difficult medicine.
Yes, she will. Unfortunately for her, she'll have to do that. But whoever was appointed as Fed chairman would have had to make those difficult choices. I think what this has taught us today, because we've got the latest minutes of the Fed meeting in September later tonight, is the fact that we're probably not going to get any tapering anytime soon, simply because we don't really know how much damage has been done to the US economy in light of this shutdown. So I think, you know, while this is the story, Janet Yellen being chairman of the Fed, for me it's not unexpected. It's a good move by Obama. He should have made it a long time ago. And it is a welcome distraction to what's going on Capitol Hill. But unfortunately, I think if markets are hoping that Janet Yellen will somehow rescue the US economy, then I think they're overestimating her abilities.
Even if it is flattering that they might put some money on that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Michael Houston there from CMC Markets, a friend of World Business Today, bringing us his views there on Janet Yellen. Well, trading has been underway, as Michael was just saying, for around about an hour here in Europe. And, of course, the trading session is now shut in Asia, and it did get a bit of a pop, as he was saying. Let's have a look at how shares have been doing in today's session. We're waiting on industrial and manufacturing production figures, as well as the trade balance data from the United Kingdom. So the FTSE 100 in focus in light of that. But as you can see, things haven't been moving too much on the upside, according to the early trades, despite the fact that Janet Yellen could be the next Fed chairman and she's pro-stimulus. The reason for that, as Michael was saying, is because a lot of this is priced in. He said President Barack Obama should have made this move ages ago. Another thing that perhaps he should have been trying to tackle from here on is the US debt ceiling, Pauline, and that is what has people concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. But the news about Janet Yellen did remove some uncertainty from the markets here in this region, and we did see a bit of a bounce today here on most of the major markets. But still, the U.S. stalemate on Capitol Hill and the IMF cutting its global growth forecast yesterday has worried investors still. That's sort of the cloud looming over the region right now. The IMF global growth forecast and the slashing of that forecast really was driven by a slowing Asia, namely in China and India. So that, of course, is concerning here. The Nikkei was up today by more than 1%. It edged away from a 5-week low. The U.S. dollar strengthened against the yen after that news about Yellen came out. Also, we did have our eye on the Japanese company Panasonic. It rose 1.6% after the Nikkei Daily said that Panasonic is going to stop making plasma TV screens by early next year. That has been one of the loss-making divisions for Panasonic. Mainland shares ended higher. The Shanghai Composite up by 0.6%. It gained back half of the session, half of its gains on speculation that a second city will gain approval for a free trade zone. That would be Tianjin, and this follows the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, which officially launched just a couple of weekends ago. Now, in South Korea, the Seoul Kospi was closed today for a public holiday. Nina.
Well, coming up next on the show, the U.S., as we've been telling our viewers for days now, could default in just over a week. And as you'd imagine, investors are worried about that. We'll bring you the details on the sharp fall in U.S. markets in yesterday's session just after this break.
The fastest lap in association with DHL.
The fastest lap award goes to Sebastian Vettel, and it goes to him in a very specific way because he was leading the race. He was looking after his tires. He was dominating this race, and he still set fastest lap. Mark Webber has the theoretical chance to catch up on Sebastian, but knowing Sebastian Vettel, you can be absolutely sure that he is not going to let that happen. Mark was very unlucky, and he had a good chance to set fastest lap in Korea. However, he retired due to an accident, and that's probably why Seb was in a reasonably comfortable position. I would say is reasonably likely that Sebastian is going to win the Japanese Grand Prix given his current performance. However, his main rival, the main opposition is still Ferrari and Fernando Alonso, and he must not finish any better than 9th in case Sebastian wins the race, and that would mean that we have a new world champion.
Where can you find the largest collection of real estate opportunities in the Middle East? The 12th edition of Cityscape Global will be 50% bigger, featuring 200 plus exhibitors and 25,000 plus visitors. Meeting points for the global real estate industry, featuring the region's largest showcase of investment and leasing opportunities across residential, commercial, industrial, retail and hospitality real estate sector from 8th to 10th of October 2013 at the Dubai World Trade Center.
Welcome back to World Business Today. Shares on Wall Street sank to their lowest levels in a month as investors faced a growing possibility, which is the U.S. could default in just over a week from now. With Republicans and Democrats stubbornly refusing to compromise on spending, the government remains partially shut down, and a deadline to avoid default is rushing closer. U.S. indices tumbled as much as 2% on Tuesday, and another investment falling out of favor is short-term government bonds. That's a sign that investors are worrying that the government might not make the payments due on them in the coming weeks, the interest payments, that is. The president and the Speaker of the House both set out their positions on the political standoff on Tuesday. President Barack Obama compared the Republicans' demands to ransom requests, but John Boehner, the senior Republican, said the president was demanding unconditional surrender before he would even agree to negotiate. CNN's senior White House correspondent Jim Acosta has more on the battle of words.
It wasn't long after President Obama walked to the podium that it sounded as if the standoff was once again at a standstill.
Let's stop the excuses. Let's take a vote in the House. Let's end this shutdown right now. Let's put people back to work.
But as President Obama moved his way through the final moments of a 1 hour and 6 minute news conference, he laid out a small peace offering to Republicans. The president said he would accept a short-term increase in the nation's debt ceiling and agree to some kind of mandatory bipartisan committee to discuss the budget and health care issues, but only after the government is reopened and a default is avoided.
They can attach some process to that that gives them some certainty that, in fact, the things they're concerned about will be topics of negotiation.
The proposal came just a few hours after a rare phone conversation between the president and House Speaker John Boehner, who complained earlier in the day Mr. Obama was refusing to negotiate.
Listen, there's never been a president in our history that did not negotiate over the debt limit. Never. Not once.
The president also tried to put some distance between Boehner and Tea Party-backed Republicans, conservatives who he accused of questioning whether a debt default would actually wreak havoc on the economy.
So when I read people saying, oh, this wouldn't be a big deal, we should test it out. Let's take default out for a spin and see how it rides. And I say, imagine in your private life if you decided that I'm not going to pay my mortgage for a month or two.
At his second news conference of the day, Boehner insisted the president's words were not enough.
What the president said today was, if there's unconditional surrender by Republicans, he'll sit down and talk to us. That's not the way our government works.
The dueling news conferences were a reminder that Washington remains in full crisis mode, something the president said he regretted.
We got to stop repeating this pattern. I know the American people are tired of it. And to all the American people, I apologize that you have to go through this stuff every 3 months, it seems like. And Lord knows I'm tired of it.
One of the biggest surprises of the day is that the president was not asked about the problems with Obamacare. So not only has the government shutdown failed to stop the president's health care law, it's actually given it some cover. Jim Acosta, CNN, the White House.
But there may be some hope for progress. A source tells CNN that Republicans may agree to a short-term increase in the debt ceiling if President Obama agrees to negotiations during that 4 to 6 week period. And here's how the votes stack up so far for legislation to open the federal government without changing the funding of Mr. Obama's health care law. A new CNN survey shows that if the Republican-controlled House of Representatives were to vote today, 218 would vote yes. That's 200 Democrats and 18 Republicans. Now, 217 is the minimum needed to approve the measure if it were brought to the House floor, Nina.
If that's the big issue, isn't it? They'd vote on it if it were brought to the floor. Well, another senior Republican has gone public with his own thoughts on how to move forward from here. This man, Paul Ryan, was actually Mitt Romney's running mate in the 2012 presidential elections, and he's been pretty critical of Mr. Obama's health care reform. But here's the game changer. In an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal, he calls for an end to the stalemate, even if Republicans can't force the president to actually tear up Obamacare. This is what he's been saying, quote, "We need to pay our bills today and to make sure that we can pay our bills tomorrow." So, he goes on to say, let's negotiate an agreement to make modest reforms to entitlement programs and to the tax code. Well, the partial government shutdown is taking its toll on federal services across the United States. We've heard about the national parks and monuments that have had to close. But as CNN's Barbara Starr now reports, the effect on some families is far more distressing.
For these troops just killed in Afghanistan, their families are being denied government death benefits until the shutdown is over.
That America could fail the families of our fallen heroes. Appalling, frightening.
Shouldn't we be embarrassed about this? Shouldn't we be ashamed?
Marine Lance Corporal Jeremiah Michael Collins' remains were brought Monday to Dover Air Force Base.
He became a Marine to become somebody, and he became a great Marine.
But his family and others will not get Pentagon funding to go to Dover to meet their loved ones. The program is frozen until the shutdown is over. Funeral and burial expenses won't be reimbursed. A $100,000 cash payment to survivors stopped. Amy Nyberger Miller works with grieving families. There is concern for those that don't have a lot of money.
The benefits are especially critical because they do provide them with the ability to make decisions quickly.
Her 22-year-old brother Christopher was killed in Iraq in 2007.
There were a number of unexpected expenses that we had not anticipated in our lives because we certainly had never thought my brother would die.
Some Republicans say the Pentagon already has the authority to pay the benefits, but promise a quick piece of legislation to make sure that happens. Pentagon officials are adamant they need the legislative fix to get the money flowing again. And they say the proof is that Congress is talking about a fix. That proves they need a legislative solution. But in the meantime, a number of corporations and groups that support military families have quietly stepped forward and are offering their financial support to families in their time of grief. Barbara Starr, CNN, the Pentagon.
Walmart announces a big change to the way it's doing business in India. Coming up next, we'll tell you about its split from its local Indian partner and hear from Walmart's CEO in Asia.
CNN Preview in association with Hard Rock Cafe, where rock star fashion goes from classic to couture.
Ludovico Einaudi's #1 selling album in a time lapse has broken digital chart records and earned him 2 Classic Brit Award nominations for Best Album and Composer.
Well, it's always very nice to be nominated of the Brits. It's very exciting. For me, writing means that I have to dive into myself and open new potential doors inside my creativity and in my soul, basically. And it's not very easy to do that, because it's not just the technique of music, but it's so beautiful when you can bring those emotions to the people.
Connect the World, tonight on CNN.
This month on CNN Business Traveler.
There's a tendency for you to need to slow down.
We're learning how to chill out. Music. With experts in packing.
The tighter I roll them, the less the wrinkles.
Organization.
Everybody feels overwhelmed.
And meditation.
And just let go.
It's the Road Warrior's Guide to the Art of Calm. Good night.
Catch CNN Business Traveller Thursday on CNN in association with Invest Macedonia and Macedonia Tourism.
The Taliban tried to kill her for going to school. They only made her stronger. Her name is Malala, and she talks to CNN's Christiane Amanpour. Her story, her future, her dreams. The bravest girl in the world. Monday on CNN. Connect the world with Becky Anderson. Quest means business. Amanpour. It's your new evening lineup tonight on CNN.
Welcome back to World Business Today, live from Hong Kong and London. Walmart is taking full control of its stores in India. The world's biggest retailer says it's ending its joint venture with Bharti Enterprises and will buy out Bharti's 50% stake. Now, Walmart runs its India stores under the Best Price Modern Wholesale brand. My colleague Patricia Wu spoke to the CEO of Walmart Asia, Scott Price, about why India is such an important market and why it can be challenging to foreign companies.
India has several 100 million consumers that will come into the middle class over the next 20 to 35 years. We think there's a role for Walmart to play, but what it requires is the ability for us to invest in a manner that's simple, where we can comply with the law and we can make shareholder returns. We have been having discussions with the government around the foreign direct investment related to retail. We have been quite pleased by the open-minded nature, but there are still a few stumbling blocks where foreign retailers would be required to conduct business in a way that puts them at a disadvantage versus domestic. So again, a bit of protectionism, an understanding that that actually is not sustainable for the long term. I hope we can work our way through it, because we would be keen to have far more growth in India.
the Asian Development Bank recently cut its forecast for the region as well as for China from 7.7 to 7.6%, right? And they released a survey here at APEC about what people are most concerned about, and they're most concerned about slowdowns in India and China. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think that certainly if we look at consumer confidence in the three markets that we do business, India, China, and Japan, our customers are worried, and we see that in terms of some of the research that we do, that confidence has come down a little bit. But having said that, it doesn't mean that they're not still interested in investing in the family. So for the products that we sell in our stores across the region, we have not seen a significant impact. What we do see, however, is obviously more movement towards lower price points, where mom comes in and she's a little bit more cautious with her dollar.
The same survey that I just mentioned to you on economic trends, people were most optimistic about the U.S. and Japan. Are you surprised? What do you make of that?
No, I think the U.S. has over hundreds of years always maintained a culture of optimism. So I think, yes, there are some challenges today, a lot of frustration over those challenges, but in general, the U.S. economy always seems to roll with the punches, and I think that that maintains a relative level of optimism. In terms of Japan, we are optimistic about Japan. I'm optimistic about the route that has been laid out, that vision that Prime Minister Abe has talked about. I'd be very, very pleased to see Japan join a TPP agreement, a Trans-Pacific Partner Agreement, without exceptions. At the end of the day, the TPP is a 21st century agreement. It needs to ensure that exceptions are eliminated. If Japan enters the TPP, I think it would continue to drive growth. It would be the end of this deflationary cycle that has existed for years and years. I think the discussions around that has driven optimism among the Japanese average person, and we certainly see it out of our customer base as well.
Protectionism is one issue that has come up with some of the emerging economies here in Asia. Have you seen any issue with that?
You know, I don't see an increase in protectionism. I'm seeing a highlight of protectionism that is getting in the way of growth. So if you were to look at some of the bigger markets, you would see, for example, even though we don't have stores, Myanmar, for example, has come out, is trying to open its market to drive economic growth. In India, for example, even though that's not part of APEC, the government is very keen to restart foreign direct investment. And what they're doing is they're looking at simplifying the environment. I was in a meeting this morning with Commerce Secretary Pritzker and the Finance Minister of Indonesia, and he very clearly said that one of the significant objectives of the Indonesian government is to reduce the amount of regulatory oversight that makes it very, very complicated to invest.
And that is Walmart Asia's CEO Scott Price speaking to our Patricia Wu, covering a lot of different issues in Bali, Indonesia.
All part of the United States pivot, isn't it, Pauline? Well, let's talk about what's coming up after the break. Janet Yellen is a step closer towards becoming America's central bank chief. Supporters say she's a good forecaster. Our Richard Quest shows us what could be a history-making road to the top. That's just ahead.
அடிக்கடி கரண்ட் ஆஃப் ஆறதுனால நான் கடையை மூடிடலான்னு இருந்தேன். ஆனா இன்னைக்கு பிசினஸ் எக்ஸ்பேன்ஷன் பண்ணலாம்னு முடிவு பண்ணிருக்கேன்.
Ardhi hii ilikuwa tasa. Hakuna maji, hakuna chakula. Kisha siku moja maisha yetu ilibadilika.
People ask how I keep smiling in such a critical place. I say thanks to Kirloskar.
Kirloskarக்கு நன்றி. அது என் வாழ்க்கையை மாத்திடுச்சு.
Kilota ilibadilisha hatima yetu.
Where can you find the largest collection of real estate opportunities in the Middle East? The 12th edition of Cityscape Global will be 50% bigger, featuring 200 plus exhibitors and 25,000 plus visitors. Meeting points for the global real estate industry, featuring the region's largest showcase of investment and leasing opportunities across residential, commercial, industrial, retail and hospitality real estate sector from 8th to 10th of October 2013 at the Dubai World Trade Center.
This month on CNN Go, plunge into Dubai. From palm-shaped islands to the world's tallest building.
It's just absolutely amazing.
We travel through desert landscapes and dine at one of the world's finest restaurants. Explore the glitz and glamour of Dubai in a luxury edition of CNN Go. Today on CNN. In association with Korean Air. CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen.
Denmark is like the happiest place on earth.
Go on a culinary adventure through one of the best restaurants in the world. Pushing you to rethink what's edible.
It's like I've never tasted a green vegetable that good.
Where it comes from.
Let's grab a bunch of these for lunch, no?
And how it reflects the Danish landscape and culture.
Cheers.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen, only on CNN.
I'm Ben Wiedemann in Rome, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN Hong Kong, I'm Pauline Chu.
And I'm Nina Dos Santos at CNN London, and welcome back to World Business Today. Let's have a look at how the markets are faring in today's session. As you can see, it's a bit of a downbeat start to the day. Not huge losses across the board, but some of the Eurozone markets down around about a smidgen. And in the UK, the market's down by even more. We've got some important economic data on the cards later on in the UK. But again, another raft of production data coming out of Germany. The industrial production numbers due out within the next hour, and that could certainly set the trend for the rest of the day. But really, what's keeping these markets preoccupied is, guess what, Pauline? The US government shut down and the debt ceiling.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. Well, here in the Asia-Pacific region, we did manage to see some gains in the major indices. The Nikkei in Tokyo was up as the dollar strengthened and the yen weakened, which helped exporters. And it was also up off of the back of the Bank of Japan releasing its September minutes, saying the economy is on track. But mobile operator SoftBank in Japan was down over 5.5% today after Citigroup slashed its rating. Meanwhile, the Shanghai Composite ended the session up 0.6% on speculation over possible approval of another free trade zone in Tianjin. That is a port city in northeastern China. And this is just a few weekends after Shanghai officially launched its own free trade zone. Now, Hong Kong closed down nearly 2/3% by the end of the session, and the main Aussie benchmark ended flat today. Well, let's recap our top story this hour. A senior White House source says U.S. President Barack Obama will nominate Janet Yellen to be the next head of the Federal Reserve. Mr. Obama is expected to make this announcement later in a couple of hours on Wednesday. And from there, it's up to the U.S. Senate to approve the nomination. Yellen would be the first woman to head the U.S. Central Bank in its 100-year history. She is currently the Fed's vice chair. Richard Quest shows us why she's considered a safe pair of hands.
For several decades, Janet Yellen's career has looked like a textbook path to the top.
She's had the run of senior positions in macroeconomic and monetary policy. She's been within the public sector. She has not played the revolving door game.
Professor Yellen began her career in teaching, and a young Jeffrey Sachs was amongst her earliest students.
She had come from Yale. She was a star student of James Tobin, one of the greatest economists of the 20th century in the United States. And I felt always privileged to be in her class.
She rose through the academic ranks, and by the mid-1990s, it was on to Washington.
I will nominate Janet Yellen to be chair of the Council of Economic Advisors.
Serving under Bill Clinton, she worked directly with a future rival and a former student.
She'd been a professor of economics at the University of California, Berkeley, and at Harvard, where she taught, among others, the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, Larry Summers, who said that his grade was sufficiently high for her to be recommended for the job. She is an esteemed writer and thinker who will serve our country well.
Thinking, and in particular forward-thinking, is Yellen's trump card. In 2007, Fed board member Yellen is quoted in the transcript of a Fed meeting. She said, I still feel the presence of a 600-pound gorilla in the room, and that is the housing sector. That sector was to go on to collapse 2 years later. Stephen Olliner, then a 23-year veteran of the Fed's research division, was at that meeting.
Well, she was one of the only people on the FOMC before the crisis who was actively calling attention to the problems in the housing sector.
Olliner remembers even back then, people would sit up when Yellen spoke her mind.
When she comes to an FOMC meeting, it's having done a great deal of thought already about the issue that she's going to speak on. So people listen very carefully when she speaks. She does not suffer fools gladly.
Janet Yellen has been and will be part of an evolving Federal Reserve system where communication is key. In November last year, she returned to Berkeley to talk about transparency.
The impact of monetary policy on the economy today depends not only or even primarily on the FOMC's current target for the federal funds rate or the quantity of assets on its balance sheet, but rather on how the public expects the Federal Reserve to set the paths of these variables in the future.
Approachable, yet exacting. Understated, yet uncompromising. No one has much doubt. For Janet Yellen, this is the next career move. Richard Quest, CNN, New York.
Well, a woman in charge of the Federal Reserve, the world's largest central bank, would be a first. And she's not just the only person where she's working in a largely predominantly male world. Only 12 of the world's 160 central banks have actually had a female governor last year. That's 7.5%. And it seems as though women in emerging economies actually stand a better chance of landing the top job than they do in some of the biggest economies like the United States. Just last year, here's a case in point, Belarus, the Kyrgyz Republic and Samoa all appointed women to run their own central banks. But of course, this will certainly set the tone for things going forward, because here where I am on the Bank of England, well, in the UK, there are no women on the Monetary Policy Committee, Pauline. There haven't been any for quite some time. Same thing for the ECB.
Yeah, so maybe the confirmation of Janet Yellen may start a wider trend. Wouldn't that be interesting? Well, central banks are trying to steer their own economies in the right direction. The IMF, which is also headed by a woman, Christine Lagarde there, says global growth doesn't look too rosy. The IMF has cut its global growth forecast and warned of more problems if the U.S. doesn't fix its debt ceiling woes. The fund says stronger growth in advanced economies will not be enough to make up for sluggish expansion in the developing world, namely China and India. The IMF says, quote, global growth is still weak. Its underlying dynamics are changing, and the risks to the forecast remain to the downside. Let's take a look at some of the IMF's concerns. Now, in the U.S., the fund is worried about political gridlock, which is what we're seeing right now. It says there will be serious damage done to the world economy if this debt ceiling is not raised. Richard Quest spoke to the IMF's chief economist, Olivier Blanchard, and asked him how worried he is about a default.
If it happens, I think everything I heard the president say about 3 minutes ago is basically right. If it happens, it's a major event. You know, we can discuss it further, but clearly just the very fact that we would have to decrease spending would have straightforward mechanical effects, which would probably turn the recovery in the US to a recession. And then in addition, if there is any default on the debt, then we're talking about financial implications, which could well make this worse. So it would really be a very major event. At the same time, I think we all agree that given that it is so dramatic, it's unlikely to happen. So we're taking this as a tail risk. It's not part of our projections. We're hopeful it will be avoided. But if it happens, it's going to be ugly.
Meanwhile, in Europe, the IMF warns of a risk of stagnation even if the economy there improves. And for emerging markets, namely Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the IMF says reforms are needed to reignite growth, specifically structural reforms. And starting tonight on Quest Means Business, Richard is live in Washington, where world leaders are gathered for the IMF and World Bank meetings. On tap today is a sit-down interview with World Bank President Dr. Jim Young Kim. You can see that interview online as it happens at cnn.com/international. That is 9 p.m. Hong Kong time, 2 p.m. in London. And then get even more perspective from Richard tonight on Quest Means Business. Of course, he'll have his eye on the government shutdown. That is live from Washington, right here on CNN.
Now, let's move back towards the immediate time frame of business and also taking a look into the healthcare world, because GlaxoSmithKline says that it'll actually manage to take the world's first malaria vaccine to the market. The British drugs maker is seeking European regulatory authority for the treatment after promising trial results. The World Health Organization says that some 660,000 people every single year die from malaria. One member of GSK's own team that worked on this vaccine explained exactly what it was developed for.
So this vaccine, when we developed it, we had who we had in mind was the person who suffers the most from malaria. That's the African child. So out of the 660,000 people who die every year, 90% of those are going to be children below the age of 5 in Africa. So the vaccine was developed specifically for that population.
Well, the WHO says that if European authorities give the green light to this vaccine, it could start recommending its use from as early as 2015. Here's Jim Bolden with more.
Malaria nets, one of the few preventative steps people can take to ward off mosquitoes that infect around 220 million people every year. With 660,000 malaria deaths in Africa each year, many of them small children who cannot fend off the sickness, a vaccine would help cut the infection rate. Drug maker GlaxoSmithKline says it will now formally seek approval from the European Medicines Agency to market the world's first malaria vaccine. But maybe unusual for a drug company, GSK is candid about the vaccine's limitations, revealed in ongoing trials throughout Africa. The vaccine works for about 18 months and then degrades. Compare that to, say, longer-lasting polio and tetanus vaccines. But supporters of the malaria vaccine say any additional tool to cut infection rates in about 100 countries will help, considering the sheer number of children dying from malaria. GSK says the vaccine trials showed 46% fewer children aged 5 months to 17 months contracted malaria compared to a control group of children who did not receive the vaccine. The Gates Foundation has committed almost $2 billion to a campaign that has successfully cut malaria rates in the past decade. And now, nothing less than what GSK says is the world's first vaccine against a parasite.
Almost 3 decades of work of hundreds, in fact, probably thousands of individuals from our company, GlaxoSmithKline, but also from our partners, from investigators in Sub-Saharan Africa.
GSK says it will use 5% of the vaccine's sales towards research to fight tropical diseases and pledges to not sell the malaria drug for profit. It could be in clinics around the world starting in 2015. Jim Bolden, CNN, London.
We're going to take a look at the weather forecast right now, and it's the third tropical cyclone in the Western Pacific this week, and like the rest, it's headed for land. Meteorologist Ivan Cabrera joins us live from the CNN Weather Center with more details. Ivan, this region has been quite busy recently.
Yes, I've been calling it a typhoon factory, and unfortunately it has been indeed, and we want to see this quiet down, but there is no end in sight over the next days. In fact, heading into next week. Here's the latest, 24. This is a tropical depression on the verge of becoming a tropical storm. We're about 7 kph so away. 62 would make it that. We're gusting certainly to that, and now becoming better organized. You can see the system is breathing here. And here's the issue. The center is well away from the Philippines right now, but the rain associated with it is already fanning out and approaching the islands here. So it's going to be a prolonged event, I think, with heavy rain and very gusty winds in the next 24, 48, 72 hours. And then eventually this thing does reemerge back into the South China Sea. But before that, it does slam into Luzon as a Category 1 typhoon here, and then continues heading off to the west, of course, in diminished fashion here. But you must prepare in the Philippines not only for heavy rain, which is going to fall first, but also some significant wind as well in the next couple of days here. So you have been warned. We do have another area. This is why we're so active here, medium chance. Although this one, I think, once it develops, has a better chance of hooking out and missing Japan, a sea storm here. But stay tuned. All right, so Cyclone 2. We're in the Bay of Bengal here. My goodness, more activity here. This is a 75-kilometer-per-hour storm, and it is forecast over the next few days to really ramp up. Look at the intensity here with a tight center of circulation, indicating some very strong and dangerous winds at its core. So this is the one that's headed for India, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha. Those are the states that are going to be impacted the worst, and that would be a Saturday late event with winds approaching 150 kilometers per hour. That would be the equivalent of a typhoon in the western Pacific. So that's what's going on with this one here. Again, the worst of the effects heading into Saturday. Conditions very favorable for this to intensify here. So indeed, we continue to track the tropics, more activity, and this one headed to India now.
Okay, Ivan, thank you very much for keeping us posted on those two different systems. Well, coming up next, smartphones have made the world a much smaller place, but there are still areas we can't reach with our mobile phones. Now, a company in the UAE is on a mission to change that. We'll tell you how right after the break.
Winning Post, in association with Longines.
As one of the most accomplished jockeys in the world, Olivier Pellier has tasted big race success over the last 2 decades. The 40-year-old has also been champion jockey 4 times in his native France. I caught up with him near his home in Chantilly, just outside Paris, where he's preparing for racing's most coveted prize. So 2 days out from the race, what do you like to do to prepare or even relax ahead of the race?
I play paintball.
You play paintball?
Yes. I play paintball for relax, so now I show you how to play.
Really?
You come with me? Yes, you. Francesca, where are you?
Winning Post, in association with Longines.
In the era of smartphones, welcome back. You're watching World Business Today. Well, even in the era of smartphones, some parts of the world are still quite difficult to reach. And where there's a gap in the market, well, companies see an opportunity, don't they? Our emerging markets editor, John Defterios, visited a business in the Middle East that's working to wipe out the dead spots in mobile communications.
In a desert village more hospitable to camels, the UAE's Bedouin Pass converges with 21st century satellite technology. On the edge of the Emirate of Sharjah, you'll find the research and development hub of Thuraya Telecommunications. Chief Executive Samer Halawi is on a mission to boost that number by putting the power of satellite phones in the hands of everyday consumers.
Are we going to start seeing a convergence between the general consumer market and the satellite market? Are we going in that world?
That's exactly where we're heading. Because of devices that are easy to use and friendly for the consumers.
And people have a greater desire to stay connected, even more so during emergencies. Whether a natural disaster like the tsunami in Japan or the Boston Marathon bombing when traditional communications were overloaded. That need to stay in touch for global business, it's what's supported Thorea since launching its first satellite back in 2000. In the world of mobile telephony, there are still corners of the globe which are hard to reach, and this provides a growth opportunity for satellite telephone providers. Think of offshore oil exploration, remote mining facilities, even the management of fishing fleets. Disaster relief operations prompt a surge in satellite demand, as do conflicts like the battle in Mali. And with demand for energy on the rise, oil and gas companies are going further afield for new finds.
You're looking for oil and usually are going to places either in the middle of the sea or in the middle of a desert somewhere, remote areas. So before you set up camp, you need to do this exploration, and this exploration requires communications. This is where we play a big role. This is where we test different pieces of equipment.
In this small lab, Thorea welcomes a South Korean developer. Together, they created the Sat Sleeve, the world's first device that gives a standard iPhone the power of satellite communication.
People are asking for more data. People are moving into smartphones. There's actually a lot more need to communicate and awareness for communication. So what we've done with the innovation is we've taken the smartphone world and the app world to the satellite industry.
And this will continue to make the world of satellite communications something that is more tangible to those of us on Earth. John Defterius, CNN, Sharjah, in the UAE.
Everyone's favorite newscaster, Ron Burgundy, is returning to screens. But before he goes back to the anchor desk in theaters, he's taking on a different job. We'll tell you more next on World Business Today.
People said that what I was searching for, I'd never find. But when I got here, everyone seemed to know exactly where I should look. So I stopped searching and let the land and its people guide me. I came to this place looking to feel alive again. And its people left me 1,000 memories richer.
Hello and welcome back. Comedian Will Ferrell is coming back as Ron Burgundy in the sequel to Anchorman. The movie is expected to hit cinemas this Christmas. And the American car maker Dodge is also hoping to cash in on the world's most famous fake Anchorman. Here's Ginny Moose to explain.
Would you buy a new car from this guy?
But I'm the only one with the guts to tell you about the glove box.
Ron Burgundy has left his anchor desk for the Dodge showroom, where he's proudly pitching the Durango's glove box.
This thing goes on for inches. It comes standard.
Will Ferrell's not-so-standard SUV ads are a twofer, promoting both the Durango and Ferrell's next movie, Anchorman 2.
Is that your foot between my legs? No. Oh. It was my hand.
You've got to hand it to Ron. He shot over 70 Durango videos, most for the web, some for TV. They're getting a lot of miles per gallon out of these spots.
25 Impigas Highway. What? Impiga.
Hey, everyone knows he says whatever you write on a teleprompter.
I'm Ron Burgundy?
Damn it! Who typed a question mark on the teleprompter?
25 Impigas. I'm saying it right, but it just doesn't sound familiar.
But will these ads make Americans more familiar with Durangos? Dodge sells less than a third as many Durangos as Ford sells Explorers. Wait a minute, Ron Burgundy didn't drive a Durango in Anchorman. He flew a burrito out of his gold Pontiac Catalina. But then the Durango wasn't around at the time the movie was set back in the 70s.
On my right is the new Dodge Durango with up to 360 horsepower. On my left is one horse with 1 horsepower. It makes you feel pretty dumb, doesn't it?
Chrysler says you're seeing Will Ferrell's improvisational genius at work.
Look at you. You're worthless. There you have it.
That he ad-libbed as the horse gazed at him.
Staring contest, go. I win.
Chrysler's chief marketing officer told the Detroit Free Press, some of these lines in the commercials are so incredibly memorable that my hope is that they become part of the Anchorman culture. So instead of this,
You stay classy, San Diego.
maybe we'll all be running around saying,
It comes standard.
Ginny Mo, CNN,
Look at you. You're worthless.
New York.
360
Brilliant advertising there. Well, a lot of investors are looking forward to Twitter's $1 billion initial public offering. The social media company plans to trade under the symbol TWTR. But here's the thing, there's already been some confusion on the markets because of its similarity to this ticker symbol, TWTRQ. Now, this was the symbol for Tweeter Home Entertainment Group, which is an electronics retailer that actually went bankrupt long ago, but it's still trading. So after Twitter filed papers last week detailing its plans to go public, the price of Tweeter's shares actually soared as high as 1,400%. So, to avoid any further confusion, U.S. regulators have changed Tweeter's ticker symbol to this to make sure investors who want to buy Twitter stock put their money in the right place. We hope you got that all straight. Now, Nina, I wonder if Tweeter kept their old symbol, that they could have maybe made a little bit more money to get themselves out of bankruptcy. Who knows?
It's a right old mess for Twitter, though. I mean, this is a $1 billion IPO. You just have to wonder, what are they paying the bankers for when they suggest a symbol like that? My goodness, that could have cost them some money, actually, with people pouring their money into the wrong stock, right, on the New York Stock Exchange. Ouch. That will be difficult to swallow. Well, time now for a check on the markets here in Europe. This is how they're faring at the moment. As you can see, a bit of a downbeat start to the day, despite the fact that, of course, we do have somebody in the central bank in the United States who, if President Obama appoints Janet Yellen, will probably be more pro-stimulus than the previous candidates that had been mulled before. So that is helping a little bit to mitigate the negative sentiment. But as you can see, even the FTSE 100 is now flat. UK total production fell by around about 1.1% for the month of July. The trade deficit in the UK also shrinking slightly to around about $5.2 billion. That market was down around about 0.4% an hour ago, so it has been recovering a little bit on the back of that trade data, but nothing really to write home about on the markets today. We'll have to see how the United States reacts to Janet Yellen's news. Well, that's it for World Business Today. Thanks for joining the two of us. I'm Nina Dos Santos at CNN London.
And I'm Pauline Chu at CNN Hong Kong. World Business Today will be back in 4 hours' time with the opening bell on Wall Street. We hope to see you then. In the meantime, CNN Newsroom is coming up next.
Hyundai believes this is where your inspirations set you free. Hyundai makes every drive brilliant. Live brilliant. Hyundai.
CNN original series Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen.
Denmark is like the happiest place on earth.
Go on a culinary adventure through one of the best restaurants in the world. Pushing you to rethink what's edible.
It's like I've never tasted a green vegetable that good.
Where it comes from.
Let's grab a bunch of these for lunch, no?
And how it reflects the Danish landscape and culture.
Cheers.
Anthony Bourdain Parts Unknown, Copenhagen, only on CNN.
Barack Obama will be re-elected President of the United States.
Dawn in Aleppo brings the clatter of gunfire. There seems to be no pattern to the attacks unless they are designed to sow fear among the civilians.